Try to remember the kind of September when life was slow and oh so mellow.
Anyway, we are incredibly privileged to have Nancy Meckler here on Backstage today. And as we've said in the mailings that we've sent to you, she is an incredibly distinguished theater director whose body of work is astonishing. You know, she's not just Shakespeare, she's not just expressionism, she's not just this, not just that, she does it all. And so in her book, she says she is going to show us the tools that she has used throughout her career to turn words on a page into a theatrical experience. This is from Brian Kulick, who's the chair of the theater program at Columbia University. So here he goes. Ever wondered what happens on the other side of the door with the sign warning, rehearsals in progress, do not enter? Well, master director Nancy Meckler graciously opens this door and invites you into her remarkable process. She brings this mysterious endeavor refreshingly back down to earth while inspiring all of us to shoot for the moon. A must read for anyone who loves theater and how we go about making it. Could you maybe just start by telling us how you ended up at Antioch?
I think I was looking for colleges that had a theater department, and I knew I wanted to go to a small school. And Antioch was both of those, although I realize now that I had absolutely no idea what sort of a school it was, even though I had visited. I think I was pretty ignorant of what Antioch was really like. But, you know, it did have a small theater department, which was a great thing, because it meant that if you wanted to do something, you'd get a chance, you know, because you weren't in competition with lots of other people who wanted to be involved.
So you ended up majoring in theater?
I ended up majoring in theater. The first couple of years, I didn't want to major in theater because I kept thinking, I love the theater, I'd love to have a life in the theater, but I would like to concentrate more on general education. But, you know, by the time I had to choose a major, I had a chat with Dal, who was a major in the department at that time, and he was rather keen for me to be a theater major, and I became one.
And then how did you get into directing?
How did I get into directing? Well, I think that's really kind of interesting because it was really unusual for a woman to go into directing. At Antioch, I had to do a basic directing course, so I did a one-act play. And I think I did a few other student productions, but it would never have occurred to me that as a woman, I could plan to make a life as a theater director, because I didn't really have any role models for that. I think at that time, maybe Joan Littlewood was quite well known in England, but I didn't really know about her. And all the directors that we had at Antioch were men. All the visiting directors in the amphitheater seasons were men.
Yeah.
It just would never have occurred to me to pursue it. So looking back now, I realize that Dal really did think that I could be a theater director, because soon after I graduated, he invited me back to do the summer musical, The Fantastics. I just realized that he knew I could do it. He knew I could do it, but did he know whether or not I could actually get anywhere trying to pursue it as a career? That was a much longer journey, actually.
It was interesting. One of the things you said in the book was that you had acted, you had been a stage manager, you had done technical stuff. And so by the time that you began to direct, you kind of knew what those other pieces of the theatrical experience were.
Well, yes, if you're a stage manager and you're on the book and you're, you are learning and you're doing an apprenticeship and directing, but you don't realize it at the time. At the time, you're just trying to be very organized and you're really feeling a bit frustrated and pissed off that you're in stage management, so you don't realize you're serving an apprenticeship. I've just seen a little blurb that somebody, Bobby Meikle, has just come in to say that her husband, Bill Meikle, he knew that I could be a director. And she's absolutely right, because he talked me into producing Winnie the Pooh as an outdoor performance on the steps of Birch Hall. And did it. And he played Pooh. And I can't remember what Bobby played. I think she might have played Roo, or no, one of them. But he actually did. He absolutely did. And he kept saying, come on, Meckler, you can do it. You can do it. So there were people that did see me as a director way before I thought it was anything I could really go after.
As a director's, process. And how did you come to write the book?
I just would like to say about that photograph that I'm really so pleased to have found it. It may not look like it, but that was me in the 80s directing. I was actually directing a production of The Back Eye, but it was really difficult to find a rehearsal photograph where you could really see people connecting and working together in that very special way that can happen in a rehearsal room. So I was really, really pleased when I was able to find that picture. Well, I think I just, I felt that when I began directing, there weren't that many ways you could really train as a theater director. Now, of course, there are so many courses, so you can train at university and all sorts of places all over the world, I think, to be a theater director. But there wasn't any training, and so you kind of felt like you were making it up as you went along. I mean, I had done the basic courses at Antioch, and I had desperately pursued an acting career for years. So I had taken lots of acting classes, but very, very, very rarely got cast in anything except at Antioch. Like, I've sort of cobbled together my method of working. And so many people had often said to me, why didn't you write a book about it? And I thought, oh no, I can't write. I would never be able to. But lockdown, of course, was a time when very often people just thought, well, what am I going to do now? And I thought, well, maybe this is the moment. If I'm ever going to try to write a book, maybe I should give it a go. And I mostly felt like I was writing it for emerging directors, and that I wanted to call it a director's toolkit at first, because I thought of it as these are lots of things that I've either learned or I've invented that I would like to pass on to another generation. But my publisher, Bloomsbury Methuen, they said, we can't use the word toolkit in America. And the only thing that I could think was maybe you couldn't use the word toolkit because it had sexual overtones. So I had to call it a director's process instead of a director's toolkit. But mind you, I now see that Michelle Obama is talking about her toolbox in her book. So I don't know why I couldn't use the word. The truth to tell, I do think of it as a toolkit of lots of tools that as I say, I've cobbled together or invented that I would like to see whether it was possible to pass them on. That was my main reason for writing it.
Can you talk about an early success was Antigone, which was one of the many adaptations that you've done and your company has done. And that one ended up at the Venice Biennale, which I thought was pretty amazing for a play that was pretty early in your career.
Antigone was a really fringe production. We had no money. So I think if you look at those costumes, you might be able to tell that they're from an army surplus store. And there are various bits of underwear that have been dyed oxblood red. This was in the 70s. I got involved with a fringe theater company in London and started to work on this very expressionistic production of Antigone. And we were all very, very idealistic. We were doing it for no money. And there was a feeling we would get very excited if we got 8 people in the audience on any given night. And then we had this wonderful thing happen where we were performing in Edinburgh, and we were not part of the Edinburgh Festival or the Fringe Festival. We were performing in a theatre tent, a circus tent, and getting an audience of about 2 people a night. When somebody who knew us from London brought along a man who was running a 600-seat theatre in Berlin. And he was wanting to have a festival of what he thought of as new theatre. And he said, I'm going to take you all to Berlin to do a week at my theatre and open, this festival. So off we went to Berlin. And from there, what happened was the Arts Council started funding us. And then the British Council sent us with that production. And we really did have a big success with it. So we were sent to the Venice Biennale and to, I think in Belgrade, there's the BTEF festival. And I think they also sent us to Munich, of all places. So yeah, that was a fantastic kind of, that was a situation that made me think, oh, maybe I really am a director. I hadn't really thought that it was ever going to go anywhere, but that was when I thought, I guess this is really what I can do.
At one point, you say that the first thing about a play is to be able to sum it up in one sentence. Could you talk a little about that?
Yes, well, in the book, I talk about the fact that I met the film director, Jim Sheridan, who directed My Left Foot with Daniel Day-Lewis, which is something people may remember him for. I'm not sure who set up the idea that I could meet him to chat to him about making a film, because it was at a point in my career when I had the opportunity to make a feature film. And I met with him in a restaurant in Soho, and he said to me, okay, can you say in one sentence what the film is about? I was really, really shocked, because I thought, oh, I don't know whether or not I can do that. And he was adamant, you have to be able to do that. And if you can't do that, there's no point in even trying to make the film. And it was so valuable that I then found that I was using it all the time with any project that I did. Can you say in one sentence what it's about? And I found that often the people I was working with found it pretty difficult, particularly if I was working with a new writer. I think they thought it was almost insulting that I wanted them to say in one sentence what it was about. But I feel very committed to that as an idea. And actually, I just thought I would read aloud a couple of little examples just to help people get a sense of what I mean. So like for Romeo and Juliet, in the book, I give 2 examples that you could have that would be slightly different. One is 2 young lovers from warring families pursue love in danger to their lives. That would be one. And another one would be 2 families at war with each other are blinded by their need to dominate and end up destroying those dearest to them. And then just one more, Death of a Salesman. Willie Loman, an older man who has pursued the American dream of recognition and success in the world, comes to see his life as a failure and is grasping for respect and self-belief as he loses his grip on reality. So obviously it can be quite a long sentence, but it's still about, trying to get it into one sentence. And I find that once you've done that, it really can be a guide, particularly when you're working with a designer, to say, this is my take on this work, that this is my take.
And I think you said, could you read Midsummer Night's Dream?
Isn't that the Midsummer Night's Dream one is really, that one is so long, it's a bit funny. You have 3 sets of characters, so it's really difficult to get it into one sentence. Okay. And also in Midsummer Night's Dream, you have to make a big decision about about what is real and what isn't real, and what do you mean by dream. And anyway, this is what I came up with. Characters locked into a struggle for dominance and freedom go to sleep and enter a dream world in which their fears and sexual desires are unleashed, resulting in huge confusion and a final restoration to love and forgiveness. It's a very complicated sentence, but I think what I was trying to say was, in my production, it was all about the people that you meet in the first scene go to sleep and dream. And then when we go into the woods, we see what those people dreamt.
Mm-hmm.
So that was my, that was my take on it for that particular production.
I think we skipped over the Fantastics, which we were going to talk
Can we
about.
show the Fantastics photos? Because Stephen Hendrickson, who I hope is with us, and this is what the set looked like, in full daylight. But once again, with Stephen's brilliant idea of having the set carry its own lighting so that you could really isolate moments. Yeah.
And I recall from what he said when he was talking to us that he wanted to, since it's an intimate play with just a few characters, had to kind of compress it to that part of the stage and kind of leave out the large stage, the rest of the stage. Anyway,
Yes. It was originally done in such tiny, tiny spaces when it was first done in New York. Yeah.
Can we move on to Onassis?
It's written by Martin Sherman, who lives over here. He's an American who lives here in London. He's best known, I think, for Bent. That was a very successful play that he wrote. And he also wrote a one-woman play called Rose, which I directed with Olympia Dukakis, and which played in England and then played on Broadway for 8 weeks. And Onassis, I don't know, it's probably difficult to find these photographs it was the final image that we had. I used Onassis as an example of how difficult it can be to find one sentence to describe a play when it's full of biographical detail, because sometimes characters like Onassis who have led the most astonishing lives, full of incredible event, but it doesn't mean that you can craft it into a play that has one forward thrust that can be one sentence. And I remember struggling with that particular play, trying to find the sentence. I think I finally did, but I can't remember it right now. And this is Robert Lindsay, who he was wonderful in the role, and he played on Broadway for a year in Me and My Girl. I don't know whether people would know him from that. And he's a very prominent English actor. And this woman playing Jackie Kennedy is Lydia Leonard. And looking at this photograph of them, on his ship, it makes me smile ruefully, because this was the second time we did the play. And so she was the second person to play Jackie Kennedy. And one had the sort of issues that a director and a designer often have, which is that she wasn't happy with that costume and the way it had looked on the first lady who played the part. So we had to make some little adjustments. I think that bow came in specially so that she could feel, that the costume was for her rather than for somebody else, which is perfectly understandable for an actor when they take over in a role,
Yeah.
And that sort of reassurance that somehow the costume is for her.
The pearls are nice.
You like the pearls. I'm glad you like the pearls. They look great together, don't they? I think it's a great picture now that I'm seeing it. Yeah.
And can talk about you're working with Sam Shepard and Edward Albee, and
right. Well, when I directed Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf at the National Theatre, I was the first woman to direct at the National Theatre. It was 1981. And it was kind of habitual to send the director over to meet Edward Albee in New York. And I met with him, and he was quite friendly. And one of the things that he told me, which really fascinated me, was that he wasn't that pleased with various productions of Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, because he felt that that it seemed like there was an uneven fight going on, that the character of Martha was a bit of a sort of dominating Gorgon, and the character of George was a sort of henpecked victim husband, whereas he really wanted it to be a real equal battle, a welterweight contest between the two of them. He did not want it to seem like, you know, one was dominant and the other was the victim. So I thought, oh, this is great, you know, it's given me this clue, you know, and when I go and direct it, I'm going to see whether or not I can achieve that. But, you know, it's interesting. I think once it's in performance, it's really quite difficult with that play. I think the audience just, you know, they do see her as the dominating Gorgon, and they do see him as the victim, even if it's not in the writing. That's the way they see it, or maybe that's the way they choose to see it. I don't know. So I didn't get very far with that. But I had a funny experience with him where he came to see the final week of rehearsals, and he gave me notes, and I had to sit and take these notes, which I dutifully copied down as he was giving them to me. And one of them was about one particular line of Martha's, and he said, "Why was she shouting? Why was she screaming when she did that line?" And I opened the text and I showed him where it says, "Martha shouts furiously." And he took this very beautiful fountain pen out of his pocket and crossed out the stage direction and said, "That was me 30 years ago." So that was the end of that.
I think
I had to change it.
Okay. So let's go on to Sam Shepard and Icarus's
Sam
mother.
Shepard, yes. I was really fortunate to meet Sam Shepard. And the reason I met him was I got a phone call from the Royal Court Theatre saying, there's a writer who's working at the theatre and his wife wants to be in workshops. And I know you're doing workshops. Can she come and be in them? So she came to the workshops, and her name was Olan Johnson. And every time, I think it was only once a week, I would take her home once a week because I had a car, and I would drop her off. And she kept talking about her husband, and her husband was writing and everything. And finally I said, "Oh, what's your husband's name?" And she said, "Sam Shepard." And I practically crashed the car because I thought, oh my God, Sam Shepard, you know, I worship the idea of Sam Shepard. Anyway, so I did meet him. And he was very happy about us doing one of his very early plays in this garage, as you would say, converted garage that we were working in, that we called the Roxy. And so we did this play. It was called Icarus's Mother. And then after that, he liked it a lot, and he gave me quite a few premieres of his plays to do over the years. In fact, I directed his final play, which was called A Particle of Dread, Oedipus Variations. And it was a play. We didn't know it was going to be his final play because he died a few years after he wrote it. But I think what happened was that he was trying to write his own version of Oedipus Rex. And then he got a bit discouraged and ended up writing a very, very modern parallel version of Oedipus Rex. And I know you, Paula, were rather excited about the fact that he had detectives inspecting the road where the father had been killed. And the idea of modernizing it to that extent, I suppose it was quite amusing.
And Harold Pinter.
And Harold Pinter, yes, I was also very fortunate to meet him because when I was working with the company that did Antigone, we used to perform in a youth center at the edge of town called Oval House. And one day, this very fancy car pulled up, and Harold Pinter and his then wife, Vivian Merchant, got out and came in to watch our performance in this very, very low budget situation. And I discovered that he was really very interested in trying to see what new work was out there. You know, he already had quite a well-known he had a well-known reputation, but that was the way he spent his time, you know, going to see what sort of new work was around.
Hmm.
And so at first I wrote to him, said, is there any chance you could write something for us? And I got a very nice letter back from his secretary almost immediately saying, Mr. Pinter likes your work, but does not think that he would be able to offer anything appropriate. And then over the years, actually, he did follow my work, and I got to do the birthday party on a tour, and found him to be, you know, incredibly helpful and generous. One of the things that happened with the birthday party was he asked me if I'd like to see a letter that he had written to the first director of that play. I'm suddenly trying to remember what his name was, Peter. Can't remember his surname now, but he said, would you like to see that letter that I wrote to him about the play? And I thought, oh yeah, you know, that would be fantastic. So he sent it to me, and in it, he talked about the characters of these very, very menacing figures of Goldberg and McCann, and he described them as socio-religious mobsters who, one of whom really represented religion, and the other one represented family. And I was thrilled to have this sort of insider information about those characters and what they represented. But looking back on it, I don't think it was that helpful, because I think I did share it with the actors, and it's very difficult for actors to play a concept. You know, for an actor to play, my character represents the tyranny of family or the tyranny of religion. You know, it's, and well, I mean, what are they supposed to do with that? And also, when you read a Pinter play or you see it, it's so full of mystery that in some ways I think I would have rather have grappled with it with the company on our own and just see what we could come up with, rather than have this solution which we were trying to serve. So I was very grateful to him for being so generous, but I don't think it helped me that much in the end.
Let's move on to your tools, some of your tools. The chapter that I love the best is the one called Keystones. And perhaps you could tell us those keystones.
Right. Well, because I was trying to make it a toolkit for emerging directors, I thought I'll just have to maybe narrow it down to 3 basics, which are the things I try to bring into almost every rehearsal room. You know, even if I was working with a huge company at the Royal Shakespeare Company or a tiny company somewhere else, these are the things I probably would feel I needed for myself. And I call them the wants, the obstacles, and status. And the wants is really based on what Stanislavski calls the objective or the super objective. I found it really interesting that, in fact, I don't know whether I saw this in Uta Hagen's book, that Stanislavski did not really come up with this word objective, because in Russian, the word was zadacha, and that translates as goal or task, not as objective. And I often found that if people were thinking about, well, what's my objective or what's my intention, that it felt a bit intellectual to them. Whereas if you say to somebody, what is your want? What do you want? That's really much easier to take on board. And so it's something I use all the time. You know, I'm always trying to sort out, okay, come on, let's try to figure out what this character's life want is, or what their scene want is. And very often when something isn't working, or I can't really engage with an actor in rehearsal, I'll think to myself, what want are they playing? I wonder if they know, and I'll ask them. And very often they have no idea what they're playing. So I think, well, shall we go back to what we talked about, you know, in the first week about what your want is, or if you're not happy with the want that we chose in the first week, shall we find one that works for you? But whatever it is, we've got to have it there, because without it, there's no base for the work. And then similarly, I could explain, but talk about obstacles to the want, and then and I talk about that a bit, and then in the book, and then status. Very much, I think that very often when a scene isn't working, you can sort of start to look at it in terms of the status of the characters, and just see whether one character has higher status than another, because in most situations in life, like in a family or in a school or in an office or in a factory, there is a hierarchy from 1 to 10 of who is the highest and who is the lowest. And for the most part, we feel that if you're of a lower number, you have to defer to somebody above. If somebody is a 10 in your office or in your family or in your factory, and you are a 5, you have to defer to that person. And I use that example quite a bit, and find that when you're doing a scene, sometimes you think, well, wait a minute, what is the status of you two characters? Why is the scene not working? Who is what? Are you both the same number? Are you both 10s? Or is one of you much lower status? Or is one of you lower status and trying to be higher status? You know, I find that it can really help when a scene is getting very complicated and nobody really knows what's going on anymore, and everybody wants to talk a lot. You can say, okay, let's just stop and look at status. And then it really helps, because you're only looking at that one aspect, and sometimes it can really open things up.
I was watching a sitcom last night, and the episode was full of all those 3 things. And I saw that for sitcoms, I mean, that's one of the principles, that in the characters and in their interaction, that the wants and the obstacles play off each other throughout the whole thing, with the status being part of what makes it all work as a scene. Anyway, it was really
Right.
interesting.
So you actually saw it through that filter. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, for me, those are the basics. I've been told that the drama colleges in London and in England now don't teach Stanislavski or any version of it, you know, that there is a completely new approach. And I have no idea what that is, but I'm just passing on the way I've always worked.
You talked about the mill on the floss, and how you came to the concept of witches.
Yes, well, Mill on the Floss, from George Eliot's great novel. In that book, any woman who steps out of line in any way, shape, or form, because there's a 19th century story, would suffer terrible consequences, and often even be seen as a witch. And so because one of the characters does drown at the end of the piece, we were going to set the play with a tall wooden bridge, and eventually she would drown under that bridge. And then we suddenly realized the set if you want the set to somehow reflect what the book is about, it would really help if we thought that this tall wooden platform on an empty space was really a place to test a witch, because they used to throw witches into the water. And if you drowned, if you could swim, you were a witch and they would kill you. And if you drowned, you were not a witch, but you were dead.
A dead non-witch.
Yeah. And so what happened was, we had broken bits of furniture scattered around the floor, as if it was the bed of a river. And then we had watermarks on the wooden bridge to show that really we were almost, it was almost as if the whole play was being seen where she had drowned.
You start out that chapter by saying, when I suggest to actors that we will do some improvising, I often sense a shudder of dread in the room.
Yes, there is often a shudder of dread in the room. And I think that's partly because improvisation is used in so many different ways in different rehearsal rooms. And a lot of people think they're really bad at improvising, and so they don't want to, or they think it's a waste of time. So I do understand why there's an issue, but I try to explain to them that because I've never studied improvisation, I've made up my own sort of way of using improvisation in a rehearsal room. And it's not about trying to create material or create a script, or get your fellow actors to laugh, because I find with a lot of actors, when you say we're going to do an improvisation, they think, oh, this is my opportunity to get everybody to laugh. And I try to explain that that is not what I had in mind, that it's about being able to investigate character. And so I have my own sort of set of, I don't know, precepts of how to make it work, which I go into in depth in the book. One of the things I talk about in the book is there was one actor I had one time who loathed all the exercises and improvisations that I was doing in rehearsal. I don't know why he hated it so much. Somebody said to me the other day, maybe he was just embarrassed, but he did hate it. And we were doing an improvisation, and he chose for his character to say, I'm just going into the kitchen. And he went behind a flat and disappeared. And then he didn't come back. So he had totally undermined the improvisation. And then we did another one where everybody was sitting around a table in the evening, and they were all doing different things. Some people were writing letters, some people were playing cards, you know, they were different characters, but all in character, doing whatever they would do, and just an improvisation for them to feel what it would be like to be an evening at home. And he chose to go to sleep. So he was constantly undermining me, and he was undermining me the whole time in rehearsal. And I did something I've never done before, which I actually said to him, I think maybe you should leave.
I'm really interested in the way that you, like if you were doing Macbeth, you had ways of setting it in a modern setting, or bringing something to it that the actors would feel that they understood.
Yes, well, I think sometimes in particular, I feel that if you're doing a very old play, very often you can't relate to it as if it's as real as the life that you know. So you're giving an example of Macbeth, but another one that I talk about in the book is there was a play I was doing by Helen Edmondson, which was about a true story about Juana Inés de la Cruz, and she was a 17th century nun living and working in Mexico, which was then called New Spain. And because she wrote and studied, she was in danger of being seen, really being put out of the church, or even ending up in prison, because it was considered evil for a woman to write and to study at that time. And I wanted the actors to have a sense of what it would be like to live in a convent, that where this woman's life could be in that kind of danger, you know. And when we tried to improvise, we thought, oh, you know, we had a lot of women having to play nuns who were in the convent with her, and we were trying to do these improvisations and to see if we could look at some of the issues in the play. And it was so cliched, them trying to talk to each other as if they were nuns, you know. Oh, Sister Clarissa, you know, I'm very upset with what you said yesterday, you know. Sort of, it's so embarrassing for everyone trying to pretend to be a nun. So I thought, I did what I often do. I thought, well, what could I come up with that they could relate to, that would be a real parallel? And so I invented this idea of a small village in a third world country with no mobile phones, no cell phones, where there was the man who was beating up his wife. And the other women in the village knew that this woman was being beaten by her husband. But they were afraid of the men in the village. And so nobody would do anything about it. And so I got them to do improvisation as if our main character was the one woman who was going to do something about it, even if her life would be in danger. And so we improvised her actually going to see the men, the two elders in the village, to complain about the fact that this woman was being beaten, and to know as she went into that meeting that her own life would be in danger. And because everybody was there for the improvisation, it just meant it all became very, very real for them. And it felt like then when they had to go back into being nuns in a convent, worried that, you know, if they wrote something, they might end up in prison. It just made it feel much more real because they had improvised it rather than talked about it. Of course, we could sit and talk about it, which is what I'm doing now. But when you actually improvise it and we've all lived it together, then I feel it becomes so incredibly rich for actors, because it's not a mental process. It's a physical vocal thing that you've actually lived in the room. Sorry, that was a very long answer to your question.
No, that's just fascinating and clever to come up with something that they could feel. Often you talk about doing rather than talking. I know in the beginning you say you left out a lot of the physical theater that was often attributed to you or that you thought you were doing, but you said it would be too hard to talk about it because
yes, well, I think, I mean, I have a chapter about physical theater, but the reason I didn't want to write about the exercises is that I think exercises are really difficult to describe in words. And so often when I've read books that are full of exercises and I've gone off and tried them, they haven't worked because I wasn't there. I didn't actually experience that exercise. And then when it doesn't work, you long to be able to talk to the author and say, why didn't it work? What did I do wrong? And the only way you can really understand an exercise is if you can do a workshop where you are doing it yourself, and then you maybe can go away and try to teach it and bring it into another room. So I thought, well, I'm not going to write a lot in this book about how we worked physically, just because it's so hard. Either it's hard to describe, and it's certainly hard to hand it on to emerging directors. So that's why there isn't that much in there about that.
Yeah, that reminds me, I wanted to ask you if you could describe the improvisation about with the supermodels and status.
Supermodels. Okay, so sometimes when I've got a big company and I have very little time and I want to teach them what I mean about status, I have this one improvisation I can do with a room full of 25 people. I don't know whether anybody really wants to hear this. Okay, so what I say to them is, you are all supermodels and you all earn a fortune, and you're in a modeling agency that has lots of different models. It has ugly models, old models, small models, pretty models, you know, but you all earn a huge amount of money. And you've all come to this casting session, and you don't know any of the other models here. You've never met them. And you don't know why you're all called at the same time. So you're going, and then I go around and I say, so all of you are a 10. You are high status in any situation because you're a huge celebrity, like Naomi Campbell or something. You're all seen in the world as a 10. But then I show each one a playing card, and I say, this is how you feel inside. So some people feel like a 3 inside, some people feel like a 2, some people feel like a 6, some people feel like a 10 inside. And then I say, you go into the improvisation and your want is to find out, why are we here, by talking to each other, and to convince everyone else that you are a 10. So what happens is everybody's chatting to each other happily because they've got a task, and they're hiding from each other how they feel internally. So they're trying to impress everybody else with this idea that they're a 10. And then afterwards, we sit in a big circle, and people are, it's a very good exercise to do very early on in rehearsal, because everybody gets to know each other. And then we say, what did you guess when you were talking to him? Did you have any idea what he was like internally? And so it becomes a real talking ground of the difference between the way the world sees you. So like, for example, if you were Macbeth, that the world might see you as a 10, but how does Macbeth feel internally, knowing that he is so conscience stricken, which he always has been right from the beginning? Does he really feel like a 10 inside? Or does he spend all his time trying to convince himself and the world that he is a 10, that kind of thing? So it opens up the conversation. And as I say, it works out really well if you have a huge group and you want to teach them about status in 10 minutes.
So we need to move. Let's skip to comedy. And could you talk a bit about comedy? And then we'll open it for questions, which there have been a lot of, I see.
Okay, well, with comedy, I talk about the fact that all theater people always talk about how serious comedy is. And I think that's absolutely true, that if you really find the truth underneath the situation, it's only then that you can actually start to explore the comedy. But I also add in the book, on top of that, you do have to have a funny actor. You know, it's not a question of getting lots of actors into the room and rehearsing the play very seriously and expecting to find the comedy if you haven't got a funny actor. I mean, some people are funny and some people are not funny. And that is a mystery, you know, that you have to find out when you're casting. You have to have exercises or something, so you make sure you cast a funny actor. But then once you're in rehearsal, I spend a lot of time in the book talking about doing a comedy of errors, which is very, very silly. It's full of slapstick, and it's real commedia dell'arte. But when I rehearsed it extremely seriously. And for me, that was the exciting thing, was that when the comedy came through, I felt like they were real people somewhere deep down inside. They were real people with real needs. And so it becomes very human, and therefore it isn't just about a company saying, we'll think of lots of funny things to do and get you to laugh because this is a funny play. I really think there's a very serious, sad, wonderful story inside Comedy of Errors. And I really, really wanted to bring that out. I think I did.
Why don't we stop there, thanking you very much for giving us a taste of your book. And why don't we open it now to the audience and let us hear from you. I think, Barry, you might have some questions to read or start with.
There are some questions in the chat. I can start with that, yes. Nancy, you've directed contemporary and older plays, comedy and drama during your career. Do you have a preference? Why?
I have no preference, no. And my preference is for a play that touches me somewhere in the gut, that I long to get off the page and into a space where it can become a journey for an audience. So no, there's no way that I would have a favorite, no.
And who chooses the director?
Well, here in the UK, the director is usually chosen by the theatre that has decided to do the play. You know, they make a list and find out who's available. And if you're lucky enough to be on that list, you might get a chance. But I ran my own company for 22 years, Shared Experience, which was a government-funded company, a touring company, and I was the main director, and then I was joined by another director, Polly Teal, and so she and I directed all the plays.
Questions to Nancy from Neela Miller. How did directing change you over the years? And what play have you never directed which you would like to direct?
I've always felt that, I don't know whether I feel like directing has changed me as a person. I feel life experiences are what have changed me as a person, really. And then what was the second one?
And
Sorry.
then what play have you never directed
Oh,
that you would
Well,
like to direct?
I really, really want to do, I still want to do The Three Sisters, and I've never had the opportunity. I've tried so many times, but never had the opportunity. I did direct 2 scenes of it in our own house as a promenade production, but that's the one I would love to do. Yeah.
And we have, what did Edward Albee think of the film version of Virginia Woolf? Do you know that?
I have no idea, and I didn't ask him.
Hmm.
No idea.
And then Kirsten, psychotherapist here, analyst, says audiences may find it hard to appreciate the deadly sadism in George's academic rationality. This is Virginia Woolf.
Ah, yes, that's a really good point, isn't it? Yeah, I mean, a friend of mine, Martin Sherman, who I talked about, the playwright, he was saying he has seen productions where you really see how powerful and sadistic he is, George. So it is possible, but I just don't know how many of the productions Albee saw himself, or whether he ever saw that. But that was what he wanted.
And did coming to directing with the stage management and acting and other technical experience actually put you to an advantage compared with your male counterparts? Or did they come with the same?
Well, it certainly wasn't an advantage in getting a job. I mean, getting a job was, getting work. It's incredibly difficult because I think, well, I was living in England, so I was a woman and I was an American. And I think that what would often happen is when they would make a list of directors that might be available, I think I would guess there was an unconscious bias of thinking, well, we don't need an American and we don't need a woman. Got you all. Hello, hello. How lovely to see you. Hi. Okay, so questions, other questions? Does anybody want to ask me anything?
What year did you do Fantastics at Antioch?
I think it was 59. Does that sound right? No, 64. 64. 64.
Yeah.
Because it was just introduced as a play in 61, 62, I believe.
Oh, really?
Yes.
It hadn't been around that long, but it was a huge hit, wasn't it?
Yes, off Broadway initially.
Yes, I saw it off Broadway. One of the sad things was the first 2 performances in the amphitheater were rained out.
Oh,
2 of them rained out.
The Fantastics is a musical. Did you have to struggle to find actors who could also sing?
Yes, but at Antioch, what was terrific was they often auditioned people from the community. And in fact, the 2 main singing parts, which are really difficult roles, were 2 people who were not at the college. I don't remember their names, but they could sing them, couldn't they, Stephen?
Leon Holster was one of them.
Yes, they played the smaller roles. Leon Holzer was one of them. So the smaller roles, but played by people that we were more familiar with, that were from Yellow Springs or from the college. But those 2 main roles, which are so difficult to sing.
The girl in Fantastics was from my high school in Dayton.
Oh.
Yeah, she was terrific.
If you were involved in any of those productions, like Androcles and the Lion was a big one.
I wasn't there. I wasn't around. The thing is, because of the work study program, I probably was away when that was on.
Fortunate to see quite a few of Nancy's amazing productions, both in England and New York. Anna Karenina, and it was, mind-boggling.
that's
Nancy,
good.
what was the one-woman show you did on Broadway where you bravely had her just sit in a chair the whole time?
Yes, that was Rose with Olympia Dukakis.
That was
And
wonderful.
that was by Martin Sherman. And it was a one-woman show. It was like very, very difficult. It's actually finally being revived here by an actress called Maureen Lipman. But it was so thrilling for me to work with somebody like Olympia Dukakis. She was here and we rehearsed together. And then, it went on tour, and I went on tour with her, partly because it was so lonely for her, you know, to be on your own and doing a one-person show and have nobody to talk to in the green room is really difficult. So I would often come in early and have a cappuccino with her beforehand, and then, you know, see her afterwards, you know, because there's nobody to bounce off of. And I remember when we came to do it on Broadway, it was Lincoln Center brought her for 8 weeks to a Broadway house. And Martin Sherman had written that, and he said to them, he said to the people at Lincoln Center, couldn't you hire one of Olympia's favorite wig people to do her wig and help with her makeup and be there every night for her? And they did. They brought him in, even though he didn't live in New York. He came in, and it meant that she had somebody she could chat to every single evening when she was preparing. And then he was always there at the intermission, when she was having tea or whatever. And then he would drive back to, I don't know where he lived, in Connecticut or something. But I just thought it was so thoughtful of, you know, how can we make sure she has a person to relate to? Because that's what actors are used to, you know. And she was brilliant, absolutely brilliant to work with. She was a brilliant teacher, by the way, brilliant acting teacher.
I think Nancy should talk a little bit about her ballet experience, because she is directing a ballet now. She has directed ballets, and one of which we got to see was an amazing production of A Streetcar Named Desire that she did out here at the Amundsen, and it was just gobsmacking, brilliantly directed.
Oh, thank you. I remember, Ellen, you were so appreciative of the woman who was dancing the lead role. She was so brilliant. She was a brilliant actress, wasn't she? Isn't she? Yes. Well, that was a really lucky thing where my company, Shared Experience, was performing at the Kennedy Center. We were doing Mill on the Floss. And there was a ballet company from England performing there at the same time. And the director saw the work we were doing. It was very physical. We had a lot of work that was really almost what you would call dance theater, which was part of the show. And he said, whoever directed this should one day do a ballet. And then years later, he asked me if I would be the director of a ballet, if he put me together with a choreographer. And it had to be a well-known story, and it had to be full length. And it was a fantastic experience. It was done in 2012, I think. And it was really difficult because choreographers are not used to the idea that somebody else is in charge of the vision. So we had a very tricky time, to be honest. But I'm still working with the same choreographer now on other ballets, although now I'm not the director, she is the director, and I just get to be her dramaturg or artistic collaborator, because as a director, it wasn't a way that she could carry on with. And in fact, I've never been able to find any more work where I could be the director, because the ballet world won't really accept that idea that the person with the vision would be above the choreographer. So we were able to do it for that one experiment. It's been hugely successful. It's toured America 3 times. And when we went to LA, Ellen got to see it at the Dorothy Chandler.
Dorothy Chandler, I said the Amundsen, Dorothy Chandler, which is even bigger.
Your book is marvelous.
Thank you.
And very, very helpful. And the way it seems like you sort of synthesized a lot of stuff. The first thing coming from the work, what you were doing after Lambda in New York, and the whole sort of avant-garde sort of stuff that you were involved with, seems to give you access to the improvisation. But what really sort of stuck with me is what I got with a sense of openness, both to working with a collaborator, with a playwright, but also what the improvisation process gives you from the actors. I couldn't help but wonder if being a woman opens you up in a way that a man might be more closed to as a director in terms of taking a lot of things in and then keeping control of it, but moving the vision forward?
Yeah, well, I mean, I do think that women are more collaborative than men. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't lots of men who are collaborative, but just for example, working with designers, I finally got to a point where I decided I wouldn't work with a male designer anymore, no matter how talented they were. I never felt that it was the same as when I was working with a woman designer. The woman designers were much more willing to think, oh my goodness, what are we going to do? Yeah. Does this make any sense? Are we barking up the wrong tree? You know, those sorts of conversations that women are more than capable of having with each other. Or should we start all over again? Maybe this is rubbish. You know, I mean, it's very hard to have those conversations with a male designer. And so, I mean, those are kind of, I'm giving sort of silly examples, but I do, as I say, I'm sure there are lots of men who are as collaborative as women, but I think generally women probably have to be very collaborative because of they're very often because of what it's like to bring up children, or because we do seem to be programmed to be nurturers in a very major way. So perhaps my way of directing is very nurturing.
Or you could think of it as
probably very female. It's probably very female, you know, which is fine. There are as many ways to direct a play as there are directors. There's just so many different ways to achieve what needs to be achieved, and we're all different, and we all get there in our own different way. But I think that I love collaboration, partly because to me some of the most exciting ideas have always come from just having a very free, open rehearsal room where somebody does something because they feel free, because they feel they're allowed to, and you think, oh, that's brilliant, that's absolutely brilliant, that's fantastic, let's do it, let's use that, let's build on that, you know. Or so you're always just looking for inspiration to come from anywhere, and the only way that's going to happen is if you open up the rehearsal. Sometimes I've got into trouble where a few times I've had somebody come to me and say, I think you should know that a lot of the people in the company think you don't know what you're doing. Because you keep asking questions and you keep not saying you can't decide. And so when that happens, I then call a little meeting and I just say, I know it feels like I don't know what I'm doing, but I want to keep everything as open as possible for as long as possible. And I'll tell you right now, I'm going to make all the final decisions. I just want you to know that now. And then you realize, of course, they needed to be told that because they didn't know. They thought maybe I didn't know what to do because I kept saying, oh, this isn't working, I'm not sure, you know. So, you know, it's, I don't know, does that answer what you're talking about,
It
Tony?
does, it does.
Yeah.
Could you talk briefly about the Anna Karenina being on the train and realizing what the set needed to be for the adaptation?
Oh, you mean about the chairs and the doors?
Yeah. The doors?
Yes, well, that was really a thing where we were doing Anna Karenina, and we were doing it with 8 people, which is not easy. And we already had, no, we didn't have a script yet, that's right. But the designer was a lovely woman called Lucy Weller. She found when she was researching, she found that Nabokov, who wrote Lolita, used to teach literature, and he taught Anna Karenina. And he was very taken with this train carriage that Anna Karenina was on when she was going from St. Petersburg to Moscow, going back home. And he would teach everything about this journey on this train carriage, about the colors, the smells, the sounds. It was very, very sensual. And she brought this information to me, and we were looking at it, and we found it so exciting that we thought, could we do the whole production with elements that you would find in a train carriage. So he thought, what if we said we can only have chairs and suitcases and doors? And we limited that's the way it had to work. And of course it was brilliant because it encouraged us to be extremely creative with those three elements. And then at some point, I can't remember when, I sort of came up with this idea that we were going to think that the whole performance was happening in Tolstoy's brain. So we were in his brain, and the only thing he had was chairs, doors, and suitcases. So that's an example of collaboration, because the thing about the brain was coming more from the writer, which is I could explain that as well, but it's a lot to explain.
Nancy,
have you worked
you want to
with
really know,
other?
you have to read the book.
Nancy, have you worked
any
with other Antiochians since leaving Antioch? Have you hired any to do tech in your theater or act with you? And I think you've worked with Stephen, yeah?
Well, Stephen designed something I directed at Trotwood. I directed Romeo and Juliet at Trotwood. That was before I came to live in England. And you designed it long distance, Stephen, I remember. You sent it all in. Well, because I've been mostly working in England, no, I haven't worked with Antiochians. Have I? I'm just trying to think. I don't think so. Well, Callista, of course. When I was doing Deucefish, Stas and Vi, which was a Pam Gems play that I had done it here. And then when I was doing it in New York, Callista did the costumes. What year was that, Callista? 1970.
Early 80s, maybe. Give me a minute.
I think it was 1979, because I always remember these things about how old my children were. And I think I had a 3-year-old at that time. So it was
when I was in England. That's when we were staying with you on Parliament Hill.
When you were working on the Muppet Show, absolutely. Callista was designing all of Miss Piggy's clothes. When are we going to hear from Callista? You have to have a session.
Yeah,
Yes,
we have to do one.
Your amazing career.
Costumes, yeah, costumes. For sure.
Nancy, did you ever use any of these techniques with family management, child rearing? One sentence, say it in one sentence.
I don't know, but funnily enough, I sent the book the other day to a woman friend who is a retired therapist, and she said, "These are all the elements we use in therapy." And I wasn't that surprised, because I have had therapy and I'm sure I was using it, you know.
There was one exercise that you did that I just would like to hear you describe. And it's when you were trying to get actors to imagine what it was like to be Macbeth with blind ambition. You were trying to get them. And so
well, I did this with students at RADA. Okay, so you think, how can you, how can you imagine that you would kill that many people just because you were ambitious? You know, how can you imagine you would even kill friends because you were ambitious? And I wanted, once again, rather than talk about it, I always want to see if there's a way I can help the actor by having them experience it themselves. And we were at RADA is the top drama college in England. So all the people that get into RADA are incredibly driven, you can imagine, to get into RADA. And this was the end of the second year students. And in fact, I had a really talented actor who was playing Macbeth. And so I did this improvisation. I said, okay, you have a friend called Jack, and you and Jack are best friends, and you're both aspiring actors, and you both had an audition for a top film studio for a huge leading role. And you live in the same apartment flat, and a call comes through that you both have a callback audition, that they're interested in both of you for the role. and your girlfriend is with you, and you talk about the fact that you have to tell Jack that there's been a callback, and you talk about maybe not telling Jack about the callback, because your desire to get this role is so huge, you would do anything to get it. And that you actually, and then you and you and the girlfriend actually talk about the fact that you don't think Jack's very talented anyway, and probably wouldn't get it, right? So you do that as an improvisation first. And of course, they do it really well, because my God, you know, to try to imagine, my God, would I do that to my good friend? It really makes them dig deep into themselves in order to be able to do that improvisation. And then they decide by the end that they're not going to tell Jack that there's a callback. And then I tell them that we're going to do another improvisation, that he's done the role, he's now very successful, and Jack has had a mental breakdown, a very bad mental breakdown. I think because he found out or something. And I say to the actor, you now feel so guilty about what you've done that you're having the most terrible nightmares and you can't sleep. And you feel like you're losing your mind, you know. So then that improvisation was his girlfriend trying to calm him down and convince him that he was going to be fine, and that the main thing he had to do was stop thinking about it, because that's what happens in the play. She laid me by the sense where you have to stop thinking about it. It's going to drive you insane. You have to stop thinking about it. So once again, the improvisation was fantastic, you know. And at the end of it, I thought, well, I hope I have given this actor an opportunity to feel what it really feels like to be so ambitious that you would practically kill your best friend. But when you sit and talk about it instead, it's not the same. If you have a little group discussion about ambition, it's not going to be the same as having that improvisation. But, you know, if I was working with a very famous actor, I mean, I've worked with the great Ian Holm at one point. Well, I did ask him to improvise, but sometimes I find with very well-known actors, they really don't like to improvise, and they start being amusing in the improv as a way of undermining it. So maybe I was really lucky I could do that with students. I'm not sure I could do it with a really, really established actor, make them do ask them to do an improvisation like that. I could ask them if they want to, but they would probably say no. That's why it's lovely working with students, because they have to do it.
Well, I think we're at the end of our time.
This was so great. Thank you so
very
much.
Please buy the book and give it to friends. Please, 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 please.
Yes.
I think it is user-friendly for anyone who likes the theater. I really do think it's user-friendly.
And I found it, having been a teacher for 40 years, that almost everything in there would be usable in teaching. Yeah, I think it's just fabulous.
Oh, that's great to hear. Thank you.
I've read a lot of director books. It's very, very good. A lot better than a lot of them.
Oh, thank you, Tony. It's wonderful to hear.
Yeah, thanks a billion for doing this.
Fire of September that made you mellow. Deep in December, our hearts should remember. And follow